All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. Thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, to thank Naftoli and Chava Tilson from Eretz Yisroel, for Naftoli's Hakar Satov to his chaver Benjamin Wohl for introducing him to the Daf. May Hashem bless us all to finish the Daf Yomi cycle together and celebrate with a siyum together in Eretz Yisroel and Mirza Hashem. To thank Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin for dedicating the shiurim and drashos this month. In the schus that Hashem continue to protect our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisroel. May all of our children remain safe and complete their year of learning with a deep connection to the land and to Hashem's Torah. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Aryeh and Debbie Langer, and Naftoli and Bela Langer, for dedicating the shiur this morning in commemoration of the yahrzeit of their grandmother, Chana Rechel Bas Naftoli Yitzchak. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah, and the family ein nechama. But with that, let us begin. So we have a really exciting daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is daf mem. We are picking up on Lamed Tes Amud Beis. Let's pick up 39b. Let's actually pick up a few lines earlier from where we actually left off, just to restart the sugya. So let's pick up 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom, with an interesting machlokes, Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Yochanan. So remember, we began this yesterday. We got a few lines further down in the daf. But again, this is the machlokes that's going to be the primary focus of today. So let's get that to start with it. I'm Rabbi Yana. Aliyah skoro mitoch kalfi ma'akeves hanocha ina ma'akeves. We'll say so now. Obviously, the focus of the daf has been the seirin, the two goats. So remember again, one seir goes la'azazel, one seir is pushed off a cliff, taken out to the midbar, taken out to the desert. We'll get into the details of that. And the other seir is offered up as a karban, what we call the seir la Hashem and the seir la Azazel. What we've been focusing on since the last Mishnah, or the beginning of this parak, is the nature of the lottery. Now, interestingly enough, the Gemara is going to get into machlokes as to which parts of what we'll call the lottery process are absolutely integral versus which parts are a mitzvah. Now, both say, here's the distinction. Something that is a mitzvah is good, but lav dafka that it is integral. How do you define if something is integral? Very simple. If you don't do it, what are the ramifications? So that's the machlokes getting into it. So Rabbi Yanai says, Aliyah skor mitoch kalfi ma'akeves. You must draw the lots. The drawing of the lots is an absolute necessity. However, hanocha ina ma'akeves. But say, if you remember again in the Mishnah, we essentially had 3 parts to the lottery process. Part 1 was the drawing of the lots. Part 2 was the placement of the lots on the respective goats. And part 3 was the declaration, La Hashem and La Azazel. Rabbi Yana says the drawing of the lots is an absolute necessity. The placement of the lots is not ma'akev, which means the placement will be a mitzvah. It's certainly good, but it's not ma'akev. That's Rabbi Yana. Rabbi Yochanan says, Af aliyah eina ma'akev. This is very interesting. Rabbi Yochanan says, even the drawing of the lots themselves is not ma'akev. So I will say, so understand what this means. According to Rabbi Yochanan, technically speaking, if you did not do a lottery at all, but instead, you just declared, this seir is La Hashem, this seir is La Azazel, it works. It works. So we'll say, fundamental machlokes. So Alibud Rabbi Yehuda, so we'll say, so now, that's machlokes, Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan. Again, Rabbi Yanai, drawing is ma'akev, placement is not. Rabbi Yochanan, even the actual drawing of the lots is not ma'akev. So now the Gemara is going to take that machlokes and kind of superimpose it on another machlokes. So Alibud Rabbi Yehuda, Damar Dvarim Hanaasim Bebig Day Lavan Mibachotz Lo Ma'akva. I will say there is the position of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa. Parts of the avoda, we didn't get to this Gemara later on. This is a Gemara on Daf Samech. So Rabbi Yehuda says that the parts of the avoda that are done b'big day lavan, which means it's Yom Kippur avoda, done in the white clothing of the Kohen Gadol, but mibachutz, it's done outside of the Beis HaMikdash, right? So both say, so remember again, got to use the pointer and the chart at least once a day, right? So remember, this is inside, this is outside. So anything done out here, halacha l'maaseh, Rabbi Yehuda holds is not ma'akev. So clearly, amalo pligi de lo ma'akva. So we'll say, so certainly, According to Rabbi Yehuda, any part of the lottery system is not going to be ma'akev. Why? Because every part of the lottery system is done outside. As we pointed out yesterday, the lottery is drawn right about here. So remember again, so any part of it, the drawing of the lots, the placement of the lots, none of it is going to be ma'akev because it takes place, the big day lovin, wearing white clothing, and outside of the mikdash proper. So keep ligi, where does the machlokes come up? Alibud Rabbi Nechemya. According to Rabbi Nechemya, because Rabbi Nechemya does not agree with Rabbi Yehuda. Both say, if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Ki pligi aligid Rabbi Nechemya, Damar chuka akol dvarim hanasim big day lavan ksiva, v'zu big day lavan. Both say, Rabbi Nechemya holds like this, that halacha l'maisa, any part of the avoda done by big day lavan, any part of the avoda done with white clothing, by definition is ma'akev. By definition is ma'akev. So it says the Gemara Mandam Ma'akva Rabbi Nechemya. So Rabbi Yana, who holds that the drawing of the lots is ma'akev, he will hold like Rabbi Nechemya. Uman Da'amr Lo Ma'akva, and the Mandam who holds that it's not ma'akev. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Hani mili avoda hagrala, lava hani mili avoda. Ultimately, again, that only applies to avoda. Hagrala lav avodahi. Now, both say this is very interesting. Because ultimately, the opinion who will say that it's not ma'akev, no part of the lottery is ma'akev, will hold that the lottery is not an avoda. But say this is really quite an interesting statement, which actually makes a lot of sense considering what we learned yesterday. Remember again, where do you draw the lots from? A little bit of chazar. Where do they draw the lots from? A box. What kind of box? Wooden box. Why? What does that show you if it's a wooden box? If it's a wooden box, it is therefore not what? A klisharis, excellent. Not a klisharis. So we'll say, so if it's not a klisharis, that would seem to point to the fact that maybe this whole thing, as much as it's a mitzvah, is not an avoda. So the Gemara says, Ike da amri alibud Rabbi Nechemya dar ma'akva. So our alternate version of this, according to Rabbi Nechemya, who says that anything done in white clothing is ma'akev. Everyone will agree, therefore, that every part of the lottery system is ma'akev, because after all, again, it's done in white clothing. Keep pligi. So why does the machlokes between Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Yochanan come up? I'll leave with Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda again holds that what? Any avodah done outside of the mikdash, right, out of the mikdash building, primary mikdash building, in white clothing, is not ma'akev. So the one who holds that the hagrala, the lottery, is not ma'akev, i.e. Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yehuda. And the mandam who says it's ma'akev, shiny hacha, ditana bekra asher Allah trezimni. And about the other opinion will say, well, the Torah goes out of its way to say asher Allah, right? With the lot that comes up, it says it twice. And the fact that it repeats that phrase is to impress upon us the need and importance and indispensability of this hagrala, of this lottery. So both say, so here's our fundamental machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai telling us we must draw the lots, that's ma'akev, but the placement of the lots is not. Rabbi Yochanan, even the drawing of the lots is not ma'akev, which I will say is really fascinating, because considering what a detailed process the drawing of the lots is, as we just saw in the last Mishnah, it's fascinating for Rabbi Yochanan to say, if you dispense with the whole thing, right? So also remember, again, here's what's fascinating about it. Remember, we spent so much time yesterday saying, remember, it's a good simon if what? Right? If the Hashem comes up with the right hand. So the truth is, you can make that happen each and every year. Just declare this goat on your right side to be La Hashem, and we're done. Rabbi Yochanan literally says the entire process is a mitzvah, but not ma'akev. Okay, so Meisei, so now we're going to analyze this. Meisvei, 2 lines from the bottom, Lamed Testament base. So Meisvei, mitzvah lahagril. It is a mitzvah to go ahead and do the lottery. Ve'im lo higril, and if you did not conduct the lottery, kosher. Ultimately, again, it works. It works. So if you just decided to declare the goat on your right la Hashem and the goat on your right la Azazel, and you engaged in no lottery process, halacha l'maisa, it works. To which the Gemara says, Bishlam lahach lishna da amrit ali b'd Rabbi Yehuda kuli amalo pligidalo ma'akva hamani Rabbi Yehudi. So both say, according to the first version, where ultimately you said, like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda, remember again, so what does Rabbi Yehuda hold? Rabbi Yehuda holds any avoda done outside, right outside in this area over here, the big day lavan, ultimately with white clothing, is not ma'akev. The hagrala, the lottery, is done outside, right over here, in white clothing, and therefore it's not ma'akev. So Rabbi Hudihi, top of mem. Ella lahach lishna da amrit pligi. Rabbi will say, according to the second version, where you say there's a machlokas, bishlam leman damar lo ma'akva hamani Rabbi Huda. Ella leman damar ma'akva hamani. So we'll say, according to the opinion who will say it's not ma'akev, that reflects the view of Rabbi Huda. But according to the opinion who says that it is ma'akev, whose opinion is reflected? Tani mitzvah lahaniach. The way you have to go ahead and read this particular brisa is not to say mitzvah lahagriel, but rather to say mitzvah lahaniach. So we'll say, remember again, let's define our terms again. Lahagriel means what? Lahagriel means what? To draw the lots. Lahaniach is the placement of the lots on the respective animals. So the Gemara will say it's possible that there's an alternate reading of this brisa, which doesn't say mitzvah lahagriel. But remember again, there were a lot of terms here. The word mitzvah means what? Means what? It's good, but not necessary. Right? It's not ma'akev. So the Gemara says perhaps you have to change the version of this brisa to say not mitzvah lahagriel, which makes it sound like hagrava is not ma'akev, but rather to say mitzvah lahaniach. That ultimately, again, yes, you must draw the lots, but halacha l'maisa, it's just a mitzvah to place the lots. Okay, so inconclusive. Tashma, both say another brisa. Again, we're just trying to figure out. Again, pretty much our entire daf today is going to be this machlokes, not the entire daf, but a part of it. Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Yochanan. Which part of the hagrala process is a mitzvah, is nice to do, but not ma'akev, and which part is ma'akev? Which part is indispensable? Says the Gemara Tashma, mitzvah lahagriel ulehisvados. It is a mitzvah to draw the lots and to do vidui. Lo higriel v'lo isvada. What happens if you did not draw the lots, or if you did not do vidui? Kasher. Ultimately, again, it's kasher, which I will say is pretty dramatic, considering the fact that there's so many details that go into each parts of this avoda, and yet you have a brisa telling us that, by the way, if you didn't do the hagrala, or if you skipped the vidui on the siirim, you're okay, kasher. V'chi tema hachenami lahaniach. So we'll say, so maybe you'll say, just like we changed the previous brisa to say mitzvah lahagriel, maybe it means to say mitzvah lahaniach. Right? Maybe what the brisa is saying is, you must go ahead and draw the lots. That's ma'akev. But the placement of the lots on the goats, that's just a mitzvah. So v'chi tema hachenami lahaniach, emos seifa. Look at the end of that brisa. Rabbi Shimon Omer, lo higriel kosher. Rabbi Shimon says, if you did not go ahead and do the goral, if you did not draw lots at all, ultimately, again, it is kosher, but lo hisvanda, but if you left out the vidui, pasal. So ultimately it's pasal. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, the fact that Rabbi Shimon goes ahead and says, lo higril kosher, lo hisvanda, pasal, seems to indicate to us that the machlokes is really, or I should say the statement, is about hagrala, not about hanacha. My love higriel, so the Gemara says my lo higriel. When it says that you didn't do the gora, what does that mean? Ilema lo hiniach. If you say that it means he didn't place the lots, michlal de Rabbi Shimon savar hagrala ma'akva. So then that would indicate that Rabbi Shimon holds the hagrala, the drawing of the lots itself, is ma'akev. But is that true? Vatanya we learned. Well, this is actually an interesting case that we'll get to. V'atanya meis echad mehen. But listen to this case. What happens if you have the two goats and one of them died? One of them died. So what's the halacha? Mevi chavero shelo b'hagrala. So we'll say you could bring the other goat without a new lottery. In other words, we'll say, in this case over here that we'll define a bit more, is you have two goats, you drew a lottery, and then afterwards one of them died. One of them died, so they have to bring a replacement goat. But interestingly enough, you don't have to go ahead and conduct a new lottery, which tells you that what? That the lottery itself is not ma'akev. So maybe chaver shelo b'hagrala divrei Rabbi Shimon. Ultimately, these are the words of Rabbi Shimon. So we'll say, so you see over here that halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Shimon really holds that the hagrala is a mitzvah and not ma'akev. Is not ma'akev. So Rabbi say, it turns out that the machlokes Rabbi Shimon and the Tanakama and the Rabbanon is about vidui, right? It appears that they both agree that hagrala, the drawing of the lots, is not ma'akev, Their machlokes is whether or not vidui is ma'akev. The Rabbanon will say vidui is not ma'akev, and Rabbi Shimon will say vidui is ma'akev. To which before we get to that, Rabbi Shimon lo yada mai kami Rabbanon. The truth is, Rabbi Shimon may have been unclear as to what was the position of the Rabbanon. Bahachi kamar, this is Bahachi kamar lahu, and this is what Rabbi Shimon said to the Rabbanon. I hagrala mamish, rabbis. If when you say that hagrala is a mitzvah, you mean the actual drawing of the lots, then kamrisu paligna alaychu bechada. Then I only argue with you on one point, which is I'll agree with you that hagrala is a mitzvah and not ma'akev, but I'll disagree with you regarding vidui. That whereas you, the Rabbanon, say that vidui is not ma'akev, I will hold that vidui is ma'akev. However, I hagrala de kamrisu hainu hanacha. But if the hagrala that you're referring to is in fact not hagrala, but hanacha, the placement of the lots, then paligna alaychu betarti. Then ultimately, again, I will argue with you on 2 points. Okay, so tashma. So I'll say let's go weiter. So remember, we're still in this machlokes, Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan. Which parts of the shiur process, of the lottery process, are a mitzvah versus which part are ma'akev? So tashma. We'll say if you think about it, by the way, it's a really fascinating machlokes, a life machlokes. In life, you have to know which things are a mitzvah and which things are ma'akev. There are many things that are very nice, but they're not absolute necessities, and many things that are absolute necessities. And the whole yisod, the whole secret, I think, to successful living is to know what's a mitzvah, what's ma'akev. Because so many times in life, we spend our time on the things that are mitzvos, and I understand when I say mitzvos, I don't mean like mitzvos HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I mean things in life that are nice. They're good, but they're not necessities. And then we leave over no bandwidth for the things that are ma'akev. And so I end up doing a lot of mitzvahs, but I end up missing out on the things that are ma'akev. So again, even in general, in structuring your day, right? A person starts the day. I have a whole day ahead of me. I have to decide, what are the things that are ma'akev? What are the things that are mitzvos? What are the things that have to get done? And what are the things that would be nice to get done? Structuring my life, my personal goals. What are the things that are ma'akev? What are the things that are mitzvos? Because if you don't differentiate between the two, you could spend a lifetime doing mitzvahs, which is very nice, but yet not getting to the things which are ma'akev. Incredible. So the Gemara goes back to Tashma. Par ma'akev es asar. So this is actually an interesting case. So par ma'akev es asar. So take a look at Rashi for just a moment. A lot of these Gemaras, we're going to see in Eretz Hashem, these sugyas a little bit later on. The Gemara is quoting it here kind of in passing, but they're very profound. Look at the Gemara. Par ma'akev es asar. Im hiktim achos min ha'avodos shal sa'ir ha'meucharos l'shal par. We'll say in this case over here, you're disrupting the natural order of Yom Kippur service. And what you're doing is you're taking some of the parts of the shiur service and putting them before the par. Va'asa kodem lapar. Hapar shuroi lekadim lo, uma'akva uposla ve'ina olalo, v'tzarach lachser v'lasos la'achar hapar. So we'll say, interestingly enough, so let me just read this phrase, I'll finish Rashi. Par ma'akev esasar, which means certain parts of the par must come before the sa'ir. And if you disrupt the order, you must go ahead and perform the sa'ir parts of the service again after the par. Now, very important piece in Rashi here, because Rashi brings you down the order of the avoda. But if you take a look, this is the last short line in Rashi. V'seder avodosei and kachi. Rabbi said this is actually just a very helpful little reference point. Rashi says, here is the quick order of the avoda on Yom Kippur. Betchila misvad alapar vidui rishon. First, you confess over the cow, or over the ox, I should say. First vidui. V'achar kach magril. Then the lottery, v'achar magril ala soyer. V'achar kach mizvada ala par vidui sheni. So we'll say vidui rishon, first vidui on the par. Hagrala, lottery on the seer. Second vidui on the par. Then v'shachta umachnis, then you shech the par. Umachnis kaf umachta. Then you go ahead and you take in the shovel and the ladle of kitoras into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. V'nosin es HaKitoras ala ish. You go ahead and you place the kitoras on the fire inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. V'nosin midam hapar ala kaporas. Then you sprinkle the blood of the par onto the curtain of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Onto the lid of the aron, excuse me. Then you shecht the soyer. And you go ahead and you sprinkle that blood on the lid of the aron. Then you place some of the dam of the par on the curtain of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Then you do the same with the dam of the soyer. Then you mix the bloods of the soyer and of the par, and you place it on the inner altar, which is the Ketoras altar. We'll say, so that's, by the way, just a quick digest. Now that's not everything. There's still some more stuff in there, but Lamaisa Lagabi, the par and the soyer, those are all of the avodah. So watch this. So par ma'akev v'sasar. So we'll say, so remember again, if you go in and advance certain parts of the shiur service in front of the par, then halach l'maisi you have to do the parts of the shiur service again. But the reverse is not true. Ultimately, again, with the blood applications on the inside. So bishlama par ma'akev esasayir, I understand the statement of par ma'akev esasayir, namely that the par must come. Or I should say that certain parts of the par must come before the soyer. The akdeme l'soyer mikame par, that if you advance certain parts of the soyer service before the par, lo avid v'lo klum, then ultimately again your actions are meaningless. Ella soyer ein ma'akev es par ma'inihu. But I will say, what's the case of the soyer not being ma'akev the par? If you want to say that you're doing the blood applications of the par in the heichal before you go ahead and you do the blood applications of the shiur in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that can't be. Why? Chuka ksiv behu. Because we'll say the word chuka. Chuka means it's an indispensable right. You can't change it around. Elalav da'aktim matanos de par bifnim mikame hagrala. Oh, rather what it must mean is you went ahead and you advanced the blood applications of the par inside of the mikdash before the hagrala, before the drawing of the lottery. And I will say from here you see that the drawing of the lottery is not just simply a mitzvah, but rather is ma'akev. Umidisidra lo ma'akva. I'm sorry, just the opposite. And from the fact that ultimately, again, the order is not ma'akev, hagrala nami lo ma'akva. So to the lottery itself must not be ma'akev, is not ma'akev as well. So there seems to be a raya that the lottery itself is not ma'akev. To which the Gemara says, lo, the aktim matonos de parbe mizbeach, Mikame matonos de soyer bahechal. No, I'll say rather, what's the case? The case is where you went ahead and you advanced the blood applications of the par in the mizbeach before the blood applications of the seir in the mikdash. For Rabbi Yehuda, and it's Rabbi Yehuda, Damar dvarim hanasim ebeg de lavan b'chutz lo ma'akvi. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that we saw before on Lam Testament days that avodas that you do with big day lavan, right? Avodos that you do with white clothing outside of the mikdash are not ma'akev. But what we're talking about over here, blood applications done inside of the mikdash itself. Elohamani Rabbi Shimon, rather whose view is being reflected over here? It's Rabbi Shimon. The Amar Hagrala lo me'akva. It must be Rabbi Shimon who's of the opinion that in general lottery is not ma'akev. V'baisim. The other possibility is the Olam Rabbi Hudahi. No, in fact, it is Rabbi Huda. Unihi de besidra lo ma'akva. And even if Rabbi Yehuda is not ma'akev with the seder, in other words, even if Rabbi Yehuda holds there is a little bit of room to go ahead and change around the proper order of the avodah, hagrala mihu ma'akva. Nevertheless, the hagrala, the lottery itself, will be ma'akev. So we'll say, once again, it's inconclusive, right? We're trying to bring rayas to figure out, remember, all roads go back to this Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan machlokes. Which part, if any, of the lottery process is ma'akev? Rabbi Yanai telling me the drawing of the lots is ma'akev, the placement of the lots is not. Rabbi Yochanan telling me even the drawing of the lots themselves is not ma'akev. We then kind of superimpose that machlokes on Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemya, still trying to figure that out. So now the Gemara jumps back for just a second. Now the Gemara is taking a short break from Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Yochanan to go back to the Machlokes Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon. We'll say that was in the brayso that we had 4 lines down from the top of the daf, that Tashma. So we'll say, remember again, that brayso read, Mitzvah lahagril ulehisvados. It is a mitzvah to draw the lottery and to do vidui on the goats, which indicates to us that according to the Rabbanon, the hagrala, the lottery itself is a mitzvah, it's not ma'akev. Rabbi Shimon disagreed, and Rabbi Shimon agreed and disagreed. He agreed that the drawing of the lottery is a mitzvah, not ma'akev, but he disagreed regarding the vidui. And he said when it comes to the vidui is an absolute necessity. So now we're jumping to that for just a moment. Vazla Tamayu. And both Rabbi Tanakam and Rabbi Shimon go according to their reasoning. This Sanya, Amud Beis, this Sanya, Ya'amod Chai Lifnei Hashem. So we'll say the Gemara says as follows: Ya'amod Chai Lifnei Hashem Lechaper Alav. So we'll say, so the pasuk, remember, is V'hasair Asher Allah Alav Hagora Lahazazel. So this is talking about the seir that had the Gora LaAzazel, right? You drew the lot for Azazel on it. So the pasuk says, Ya'amod Chai Lifnei Hashem Lechaper Alav L'Shalach Oso LaAzazel Min Bara. Literally, shall stand living before Hashem, L'Chaper Alav, to achieve atonement through it, L'Shalach Oso LaAzazel Min Bara, to send it to Azazel in the desert. Okay, so let's analyze this. Ya'amod Chai Lechaper Alav. So look at Rashi for just a moment. Ya'amod Chai Al Karchach L'Lamdeno So we'll say, what is Ya'amod Chai? It shall stand living in front of us. What does that come to teach us? So Rashi says it comes to teach us that halacha l'maisa, if after being chosen as the seir la'azazel, that seir dies, you must replace it with another seir. Rashi says, Shemeis atatzarech lahavi acher, de'ilo l'may asa. Otherwise, what does the phrase Ya'amod Chai come to teach me? Im tomar shelo yishalchenu ad la'acher matan damim lichtov Ya'amod Chai lifnei Hashem lechaper alav Chai lamali ele shemeis tzarech lahavi acher. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says Ya'amod Chai must be coming to teach me that Allah Chalamayse, in the event that the seir dies after the drawing of the lots, you must replace it. So Ya'amod Chai lifnei Hashem lechaper alav ad masai yihye zakok la'amod chai. Ultimately, again, until what point in time must this seir remain living? Ad shas matan domo shel chavero. Until the time that the blood application of the seir la Hashem takes place. The Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says no. Ad shas vidui dvarim. Rabbi Shimon says it must remain living until the time ultimately of vidui. So what are they arguing about? Kidisanya lechaper bekaparas domim hakosov medaber. So this is very interesting. What they argue about is as follows: when the Torah says Ya'amod Chai lechaper, Ya'amod Chai lefnei Hashem lechaper, what does lechaper refer to? So the Gemara says lechaper bekaparas devarim hakosov medaber. Sorry, bekaparas domim hakosov medaber. The kapara the Torah is referring to over here is the kapara of the blood application. V'chin hu omer v'chila mechaper as hakodesh. And so too the pasuk says, literally, the kapara will be finished in the kodesh. Ma lahalon bekaparas damim. Just like over there it's referring to kaparas damim, to ultimately atonement that is achieved through blood application. Afkan kaparas damim. So too over here it's referring to the kapara achieved through the blood application. Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says no. Lechaper alav bekaparas dvarim hakosov medaber. And Rabbi Shimon understands that ultimately the chaper alav does not refer to kaparas domim, but rather it refers to kaparas dvarim. Ultimately, again, that what is ma'akev is the ability to recite vidui. We'll say, take a look at Rashi just a moment. Rabbi Shimon Omer, ki deparish time lekamon, v'ani shantiv azlu tamay ba'agrala ma'akva v'lo ma'akva v'yev shalamida. Fine. So that's the machlokes. So now watch this. The Gemara goes on a little bit of a tangent for just, fine. We'll do this piece, then we'll come back to the Rambam. So also listen to this interesting case. Tashma. Shalu Tamidav as Rabbi Akiva. The students asked Rabbi Akiva the following shaila. Allah bismol, mahu shiyachzer liyamin. Listen to this fascinating case. What happens if the goral, the lot, La Hashem comes up in the left hand, can he switch it to the right hand? Right, so we established yesterday that halacha l'maaseh, it's a good siman, right? It's a good siman for the La Hashem La to come up in the right hand. But it came up on the left hand. Can you go ahead and switch it? So we'll say Rashi says over here, Allah b'smol goral shein. Right, so the goral La Hashem comes up in my left hand. Can I go ahead and switch it to my right hand? So we'll listen to what Rabbi Akiva responds. This is fascinating. So Amar Lahen, Rabbi Akiva said to them, Al titnu makom l'tzedukim lirdos. Do not give a platform, or literally a space, for the tzedukim to rebel. What does this mean? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Al titnu makom l'tzedukim, talmidim acholkim ala Torah. So remember, who are the tzedukim? So the tzedukim are the individuals who go ahead and reject the authenticity of Torah Shabbat Peh. They don't believe in the verbal tradition, the oral tradition. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva says, do not give them talmidim acholkim ala Torah lirdos v'lim shel bohen l'kaper esem b'dvarim shiyomru v'fi ritzonam heim osim hakol. So we'll say, remember again, what's the major argument of the tzedukim? The major argument of the tzedukim is they say, listen, the rabbis just make stuff up. They just make stuff up, right? They decide what they want to do. They write it down in Gemara. They claim a Masorah, and they just make stuff up. So Rabbi Akiva says to me like this. This is fascinating. Rabbi Akiva says, if you go ahead and you start drawing lots, and then you draw the lot for Hashem in the left hand, and you switch it to the right hand, people are going to accuse you of just doing whatever you want. So leave it alone. Don't switch hands. So we'll say, here's what's very interesting about this. So the Gemara says, Taima, diatitnu makom l'tzedukim lirdos ha lav hachi mehadrinale. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. You see, what would you have expected Rabbi Akiva to say? What would you have expected him to say? I would have expected him to say, the lottery is the lottery. The whole point of the lottery is the lottery determines which shiur is la Hashem, which shiur la Zazel. If you go ahead and you switch hands, by definition, you end up undermining the authenticity of the lottery. But that's not what Rabbi Akiva says. What Rabbi Akiva is concerned about over here is not the authenticity of the lottery. What Rabbi Akiva is concerned about over here are the optics of this, right? That it looks like you're just playing with halacha to suit your needs, which plays into the hands of the tzdukim. So the Gemara says, Taima, diatitnu makom l'tzdukim lirdos. The reason Rabbi Akiva is concerned about switching the lots from hand to hand is because of the optics of it. It gives the tzdukim fire, fuel for their fire, to say that the rabbis make stuff up. Halachi madrinale. But for example, I would both say, sounds like if the tzdukim were not a problem, let's say there were no tzdukim, sounds like what? Rabbi Akiva would be okay with you switching the right hands for the lottery. To which the Gemara says, Aiva ha'amrit hagrala ma'akva. But one second, we just said before that the hagrala, that the drawing of the lots, is ma'akev. V'cheven dekav isu small. Heichim mahadrin alei. Shabbos says, I don't understand. If you drew the La Hashem lot in your left hand, and therefore the goat on your left is La Hashem, how can you go ahead and now switch to the lots and make the shiur on your right La Hashem? To which the Gemara says, no. The kevan de kavase small heichim mahadrin alei. So how could Rabbi Akiva and even entertain the possibility? I will say, because again, from Rabbi Akiva's response, it sounds like if there was no tzeduki problem, Rabbi Akiva wouldn't have a problem with this. But I don't understand. If you take the approach that the hagrala, that the lottery is ma'akev, then once the lottery determines which shiur is La Hashem, you can't then switch hands. To which the Gemara says, Amarava, no, ha'chi kamrilei. Allah hagoral b'smol, mahu sheyachzir lo ulesiiro liyamin. But let's say, these are what they were asking Rabbi Akiva. They weren't asking about simply switching the lots. They were asking about what? Switching the lots together with the designated goats. Now, I will say, when you read the Shiloh, what it sounds like is like this. The Kohen Gadol draws the lots. The lot in his left hand is La Hashem. The lot in his right hand is La Azazel. The moment that happens, what occurs? What occurs? The shiur on the left is La Hashem. The shiur on the right is La Azazel. We thought that the Shiloh was, just switch the lots. And now make the goat on the right La Hashem, and make the goat on the left La Azazel. No. The Gemara says, no. Everyone's going to agree that halacha l'maisa, once you draw the lots, the identity of the respective shiurim are locked in. So the shiur on the left is La Hashem, the shiur on the right is La Azazel. What were they asking Rabbi Akiva? can we just take the shiur on the left, which is the shiur LaHashem, and just switch it to the right? So we're not switching designations. What are we switching? Locations. Keep the designation, switch the location. So again, to what Rabbi Akiva says, Al titnu makom litstukim lirdos, because we'll say, interestingly enough, you're right, that's not a lottery issue. Right? The lottery is there. We're not changing the results of the lottery. We're just changing the results. Ultimately, again, we're just changing the location of the goats. To which Rabbi Akiva says, don't do it. But we'll say, not because there's a halachic problem with it. Not because of a halachic problem. But Rabbi Akiva says, just simply because the optics of it are not good. The tzdukim are going to say, look what you're doing. You're just playing around with the halacha, using it to suit your needs. Which I say, I want to tell you something so profound. You begin to see how people's disposition, right? We'll say, what's this whole thing about switching it to the right? Right? What's the whole thing? The whole thing is just based on what? The fact that it is considered to be a siman l'tova. A siman l'tova if the shiur LaHashem comes up on the right hand. So you see, by the way, the fact that this shaila comes up is you see how much people are impacted by simanim. Right? How much people are impacted by kind of like the signs that they observe, which is an incredible yisod. This happened now in the Mikdash. These signs are more significant, right? Because in the Mikdash, signs were not just nice omens; they were considered to be an expression of divine intent. So the shiur LaHashem comes up on the right hand. In the eyes of many people, that seemed to be the same thing as we'll learn about this as the crimson, the red thread turning white. But it also just tells you how impacted people are and how their disposition is impacted, how their outlook is impacted by the things they observe in the world. I think this fits in very much into the concept in Pirkei Avos of Heve mekabel kol adam b'sever panim yafos. Right? To receive every person with a smiling countenance. So you ever wonder to yourself, why? I'm in a bad mood. I'm having a rotten day. And yet, again, I have an obligation to go ahead and smile at you. I have an obligation to greet you with a smile. What's the pshat? So the Maharal says so profoundly, it's such a simply so, but so profound, that ultimately, again, when you interact with someone, how you see the other impacts you. Right? As much as we're individuals, but the omens and the signs I see have a dramatic impact on my life. So the Maharal essentially says is as much as I might be having a bad day, I don't have the right to ruin your day as well. People are impacted by the external signs that they observe. This is true in everyday life, which is amazing enough why we have an obligation to kind of broadcast positivity, even if we're not feeling all that positive. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge. And that's true in everyday life. But Allah has kama v'kama inside the mikdash as well. So that's why you have this havamina. They have this havamina. The shiur LaHashem showed up on the left side. Can I go ahead and change it around? But again, the shaila is, I'm not changing the designations. I'm only changing what? The location, to which Rabbi Akiva says, don't do it, because you're giving a makom to the tzedukim. To which the Gemara says, so Tashma. So we'll say, so again, still trying to figure out the machlokes. Tashma. Ilu nemar es hasoir asher alav hayisi omer yanichenu alav. So let's listen to this. Had the pasuk said, es hasoir asher alav, right, on it, I would have thought what? I would have thought that the lot, mamish, has to be placed on top of the shiur. Talmud lomar Allah. Pasuk says asher Allah alav. Both say this is the pasuk. V'hasair asher Allah alav. The shiur which the lot of La'azazel went on it, as opposed to saying alav Allah alav. That teaches us what? Kevan sha'Allah shuv enot tzarich. Once the lot is pulled out, in other words, once Allah, both say Allah means once it's drawn, no further placement is necessary. Which I will say would seem to indicate that what? The only part of the lottery process, which is an absolute necessity, is the drawing of the lot. The placement of the lot, however, is not a necessity. So Lamai, what does this mean? If you want to say that ultimately, again, it's a mitzvah, michlal dahanocha mitzvah namilo. But say, so you're telling me then that if you, so how do you understand this? Are you telling me then that the hagrala, the drawing of the lots itself is a mitzvah? But if the drawing of the lot is a mitzvah, then the way you make it sound is the hanocha is not even a mitzvah. Ela lav la'akev. Ushmamina hagrala ma'akva, hanocha lo ma'akva. But perhaps what it seems to be saying about say is as follows. The halacha l'maisa, the placement of the lot is not ma'akev, but the drawing of the lot is. So the Gemara wants to suggest, based on this braysa, hagrala ma'akva, the drawing of the lottery itself is ma'akev, but anacha, the placement of the lots on the respective goats, is not ma'akev. Amar Rava said not necessarily. Hachikam, this is what we mean to say. Ilu ne'emar asher alav, had the pasuk just said asher alav, the lot on it, and not asher alav, hayisi omer, yanichenu alav ashas shchita. I might have thought that the lot would have to remain on top of the goat until the zman of shchita. Talmud lomar asher Allah. Therefore, the pasuk says the lot which came up upon it. Kevan sha'ala. Once the lot has been drawn, shuv einot tzarich. The lot does not have to remain on the goat anymore. So tashma va'asau chatos. So both say the pasuk says you shall make it a chatos. Hagorel oseo chatos ve'in Hashem oseh chatos. It is the lottery that ultimately makes it a chatos, and not the calling of its name that makes it the chatos. Rashi says ve'in Hashem im karlo shem below gora. This is very interesting. What gives this the respective seirim their identity and designation? It's the goral. It is the lottery. But if the kohen were to just go ahead and declare this one's La Hashem, this one's La Azazel, that would not endow it with identity. Because otherwise, without this, I would have made the following kal v'chomer. But listen to this. In other karbanos, where there is no goral, right, there is no lottery. So how do you determine carbonic identity? Designation. Right? We'll say, so what's an example of karbanos whose identity is not determined by lottery? Every other carbon. No other carbon is determined by lottery. Let's say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, B'shar karbanos. By all other karbanos, hatzrichin perush, kigon, kinei zavin, v'zavos, v'yoldos, she'echalem chatas, ve'echalem ola, shlo kiddush goral, im kasav al shnei goralos, al echad chatas, al echad ola, v'nasan aleim, lo masinu shagoral kavam, v'liyachal shnosan. Shabbos say, by all other karbanos, now we're going to see, this works best with karbanos, with pair karbanos, right? That let's say a yoleda, someone who gave birth offers up, or a metzora, or a zav. So in other cases where you're bringing two animals as karbanos, there's no lottery. There's just simply a designation, right? You identify, this is a chatos, this is an ola. So by other makom shelo kidesh hagoral kidesh Hashem. So by other karbanos where goral does not establish identity, but yet kidesh Hashem, calling it, right, naming the karbanos, or naming is the wrong word, declaring the identity of the karbanos works. Makom shekidesh hagoral eno din sheikadesh Hashem. Certainly in a situation where goral could work, certainly just designating the animals should work as well. Talmud lomar v'aso chatos. Therefore, the pasuk says, and it will make it a chatos. What makes it a chatos? Hagoral oseh chatos ve'ein Hashem oseh chatos. Ultimately, again, it is the goral that makes it a chatos, and simply designating the carbon does not make it a chatos. Top of Mem Aleph, Stam Sifra Mani Rabbi Yehuda. Ultimately, again, a Stam Sifra, right? Rashi says over here, all right, an unnamed source in the Sifra, who is Rabbi Yehuda, the Katani Hagoral Osechatos, Ve'in Hashem Osechatos. And it says that ultimately it is only the drawing of the lottery that makes it into a chatos, and mere designation does not. Alma Hagrala Ma'akva. So what do you see here? Rabbi said that the drawing of the lots themselves is Ma'akev, to Yufta demanda Amar Hagrala lo Ma'akva to Yufta. And this would seem to refute the position of the Mandam who says that the lottery is not Ma'akev. Indeed, it is a refutation. So Rabbi say, what is the halacha l'maisa? So remember again, we began this sugya, although I want to just point out the sugya is actually not totally done, because the Gemara now is going to apply this discussion to other pairs of karbanos that are brought. But for our purposes, halacha l'maisa, right, how do we pass it? So remember, let me take you back for just a moment. This all began with a machlokes Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan. And again, Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan arguing, Rabbi Yanai telling us the drawing of the lots is ma'akev. Every other part of the process is a mitzvah. Rabbi Yochanan telling me, even the drawing of the lots is a mitzvah. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, even if the Kohen Gadol just went ahead and said La Hashem and La Azazel, that is enough. Remember that we then superimposed that machlokes on some larger machlokes, right? Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia, a whole bunch of other things. So how do we paskin? So I'll say, here we go. So the Rambam in Hilchos Yoma Kippurim, Perek Gimel Halacha Gimel Avodim Kippur. I'll just tell you, it actually happens to be fascinating to just read through the Rambam Perek Gimel, because he goes through the entire avoda. It's a digest, and it's just incredible. So here we go. Taraf Bakalfi. So here the Rambam is describing the Kohen Gadol goes ahead and first of all, we'll say, I don't know if I think I mentioned this. Remember 2 days ago we had a machlokes. Yesterday. I'm sorry. Yesterday we had a machlokes. Right, the box. Remember the box for the lots was how big? How big? Enough to fit in 2 hands. We did have a machlokes about what? Whose hands were going in there, right? One man Dharma said it was the right hand of the Kohen Gadol, right hand of the Skan. Other opinions said 2 hands of the Kohen Gadol. The Rambam paskins, it's the 2 hands of the Kohen Gadol. So the Kohen Gadol puts in his right hand and his left hand, simultaneously pulls out the 2 lots. So watch this. Taraf bekalfi, he goes ahead and he puts in, I will say, remember again, a little chazar. Taraf means what? Quickly pulls out. Because you don't want him what? We don't want him feeling around to see which one is Lashem and which one is Azazel. So he quickly pulls out the lots. And he pulls out the 2 lots with 2 hands. L'shnei asirim, for the 2 goats, uposeach yadav. So essentially what he does is, puts his hands in, grabs, has his hands closed, pulls it out, opens his hands. Im shal shem Allah biyamino, if the one last Shem comes out on his right hand, Hasgan Omer Ishin Kohen Gadol Hag Beyamincha. So the Kohen Gadol, says the Kohen Gadol who's standing to the Kohen Gadol's right, says, Kohen Gadol, raise your hand. Vim Bismol Allah, and if the lot La Hashem comes out in his left hand, Rosh Beis Av Omer Lo Ishi Kohen Gadol Hag Beismolcha. So ultimately again, if it's the left hand, so the Rosh Beis Av will say, Kohen Gadol, raise your left hand. The no same shnei hagarolos al shnehem. So right, look what the Rambam saying. First part the Rambam says is you're drawing the lots. Process we saw in the Mishnah. Next part, each lot is placed on the respective goat. Shal yamin al shal yamin, v'shal small al shal small. Right, the right lot on the right goat, the right lot on the right goat, the left lot on the left goat. We'll say now, why does the Rambam say that? No switching around. Right, no switching around. V'im lo nasan, here we go. What if you did not place the lots on the goats? Lo ikev ela shechisar mitzvah. Well, the Rambam says, but if you did not place the lots on the goats, you missed out on a mitzvah, but it's not ma'akev. Here we go. Shanocha mitzvah she'ena ma'akeves, v'hagrola ma'akeves af api she'ena avod. The boss said, this is incredible. So the Rambam says that halacha l'maisa, this is very important. Hagrola, the lottery itself is not an avoda. Because if it was an avoda, it would require what? A klisharis. And the box is not a klisharis. Why not? Made out of wood. So even though the hagrola is not an avoda, it is ma'akev. You must do the lottery. The only way to go ahead and create the identity for the respective seirim is through the lottery. So the drawing of the lots is ma'akev, but amazingly enough, how do we pass in? So Rabbi say, essentially like Rabbi Yanai, the drawing of the lots is ma'akev, the placement of the lots are not ma'akev, mitzvah ma'akev. Rabbi say, by the way, so the Rambam says there's an incredible ramification of this. This is so fascinating. Lefichach, therefore, hanocha kshera bizar, v'ha'alas hagaralas min ha'kalfi psula bizar. So I say, listen to this. So because the actual drawing of the lottery itself is ma'akev, only a Kohen could do it. But technically speaking, the placement of the lots on the seirim is a mitzvah not ma'akev, and therefore even a non-Kohen could do it. Well, isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? So remember, even though, which makes sense, because the avodah of Yom Kippur could only be done by a Kohen Gadol, and even though the drawing of the lots themselves is not an avodah, as the Rambam says, because it's ma'akev, because it's indispensable to the avodah. Here's the great anomaly. It's not an avodah, but it's indispensable to the avodah. It can only be done by a Kohen, but the placement of the lots on the goats themselves is only a mitzvah, not ma'akev, and therefore could technically be done by a non-Kohen, by a zar as well. All right, Shkach, we'll stop over here. Pick up in the rest. I'll see you tomorrow. Good Shabbos.